Thank you. Uh, Now, if I talk about and give my presentations given 10 minutes time, talking about relationship which is more than 2 million year old, and that too after the presentations, the extremely good presentations that were there before me. So probably part of it covered by one scholar, part of it was covered by other scholars. So my job remains to read out the conclusion. So it's but anyway, I think I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity, and I would like to say that. This is, I mean, in fact, I'm not going to read the whole paper, which is of more than 25 pages. Of course, I mean, reading would not have been a problem, but then I'll simply take possibly some of the repetitions would be, which the previous presenters have already talked about. So I will be simply touching upon those and talking about drawing the main line of argument that which actually leads to my conclusion. So the main argument and the title of the paper is Integration and Cultural Linkages, India and Central Asia. So it's basically, in the beginning, in the morning today itself, when we had this keynote address, that is where we were emphasized about that integration and the land of this thing, the India, the culture, it is not the assimilated cultural aspects, it is kind of integration, and that is where my focus goes to. And in fact, even if the some of the aspects that I will be touching upon, rather mentioning about, will be thinking in terms of what is it that I mean by integration, and how is it that we are going to look at the cultural relations in the coming where do we go from here now. So enough of praising that we had good cultural relationship, but then where do we stand and what is it that we need to take forward. So this is the approach that I'm trying to adopt to talk about just now. And again, coming back to that, the region that we are talking about, it has evolved together. The whole region was, whole area was considered to be the Central Asian, Kazakhstan, Northern India. This was actually a part of the larger territory, and which has actually evolved together. And what we mean by evolving is that definitely the trade and cultural relations were the key aspects with which we began it. But then it was something like the sharing the practices of the agriculture, sharing the cultural linkages and all. That is something that contributes to the behavioral part. So when we are talking about culture, we are actually talking about that the instant behavior that has actually. And this here I would also like to quote one of my the sacred persons, people, gurus, then they had mentioned that when we say we like you, we love you, what do we mean? But then that means one has to like the person as a whole, and it is not like I like you but then I do not like your thought process. So this is something which goes in contradiction. And since morning also we have discussed that it is Indian culture, it is the Central Asian culture, or it is, so what is it that is different between Central Asia, Asian culture, India and the Europe? We have this tendency of looking at Europe that as if it is superior to us. We consider, except for China is instead of making that Eurasian belt and all, and it is us, like the Asian people, we look at the Europe as they are superior civilization to us, and then we try to copy them. And ultimately what our presenters also talked about, that we value our international or bilateral relations in terms of what has been the turnover in terms of economy and all. So what actually we need is to look back the cultural relation. We can actually, I will probably name some of the aspects now in the first part of presentation. It is just merely to show you that what exactly we should pick up. We cannot touch upon all the cultural linkages because it was so deep rooted, and it actually percolated down to every aspect of the human society. So it is only mentioning some of them, and then how I'm coming to my conclusion. So it included not only the architectural, monumental, paintings, literature, rituals that were part of, some Vedic, especially the burial process and all. That is where we have the commonness, believe in God, the fire thing, that is what we strongly believe in, that is common and all. In fact, going back to the magical, about which Dr. Laura already talked about in her presentation, about that sacred horse that we are talking about. So here we have that Nizami, and I am taking that quote, that Nizami, how he talked about that horse, the sacred horse, is in the legend. In the legend, I'll just in the legend, that Ibn Hordad Beg, this thing. So how it is interpreted? The same thing is interpreted differently when we look at the culturally. And what is it? It is talking about the moment that Iskander climbs on it, somebody climbs on this horse, the sacred horse, suddenly there is a storm, suddenly the mountain stops, all the negativity stops, and then positivity emerges. Similar motif we can find in many of the Indian fairy tales of different regions. So similarity here I'm talking about that Central Asia and Indian region or Indian culture had, was in the thought process, which actually is the contribution, and that is why we count that the literature that was produced during this period has immensely contributed to the world culture, global culture. So this is something where we are, and here now, I mean, I'm not again going in detail. I'll just talk about the trajectory that if we see. So we have already seen that beginning from the 3000 BCE till this thing. So if you look at the trajectory, and we see that it has further grown, and grown in the sense of the contribution of poets. Again, I mean, I do not want, beginning from Jakati, where the trade caravans it talks about, then the paintings of Red Hall, which is there in the Varakshah, Uzbekistan, then the paintings of Ajanta, painting of Buddhist art, then we have Indian cultural influence, Mathura art, Gandhara art, which you have already mentioned about. So, and apart from that, there were military techniques that were shared. So what is it that we are talking about, and how do we, when we look at this trajectory, what do we get? That it has further deepened in terms of that collaboration in the poems, in the literature, which actually immensely contributes in the building up of a personality. Despite having different religion, there has been religious diversity, except for till Buddhism was there. After that, when the Islam was introduced there, the religious diversity was there, but the connectivity remained constant. Coming to this, till 18th century, again, I'm not mentioning the name of Amir Khusro, Mirza Ghalib, and so on and so forth. But then what we are talking about, that under Soviet period, we did not have, there is a disconnect between the Central Asian region and the India region. There was no disconnect. The disconnect was in terms of political, in terms of direct economic ties. The disconnect was never there in terms of culture. In terms of culture, we visited, I mean, being in the, I studied in the Soviet Union, so I visited Central Asian countries multiple times. I mean, we had friends and all. And every time we entered the Chaikhani and all, we had the common culture, the cultural similarities which actually existed even under the Soviet period. So it is not the cultural disconnect that we had. Coming back to now, the restoration process immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was again the economic disconnect that is being talked about it. Yes, that was there, but then look at the number of Central Asian people who actually visited India and what all they purchased from India. So if we compare now, talking about the trend and comparative what we had earlier, where we had the trajectory which actually grew constantly, directly or indirectly, and what we had now, what? I mean, in modern times. So it is, we are strictly focusing on geostrategic terms. We are not looking at the cultural richness of the countries that we had. So the point is, how do we move ahead? The policies that are being extended, neighborhood policies, connect Central Asia policies and all, it is now we are focusing on the Made in India and all other projects. And here the new concept that we have to take it further. I'm concluding. We have to take it further from here. And what is it that, how do we contribute? So that is where I looked at the creative cultural industries that have emerged here. And in the creative cultural industries, if I can mention, I had this, the example of the Kazakh mythical name, that is Albasti, or the, I need specs to read this out, Kuldirgish. And then some laugh that Ubbe or Zalgi or Kozdi Dao, so one-eyed giants and all. So in terms of promoting or restoration of the cultural ties that we had will not be resolved by just referring to some or the other. Converting them into the practical. And if the focus is economy, so let us convert it into the creative cultural industries, which will need more people-to-people connect. And the people-to-people connect that we had earlier times is not there in the modern societies. So promoting the cultural industry, creative cultural industries, which can be item of day-to-day uses, maybe souvenir shop, maybe something, and that should have the motifs taken from the mythology, taken from the folk literature of the region, which actually contributes a two-way contribution, in the sense, one is preserving the traditional cultural heritage, and second, getting the outcome of it in terms of economic ties. Thank you so much for your attention.